Come on. All right. Welcome to the April 10th Serverless Cloud Events Working Group call. What am I missing? 245. I got it. Scare everybody. Okay. Um, all right. First, let's talk about the X registry PR for this week, since that one's ready to go. Not too many changes. I added some more samples relative to the core spec itself. I think last week when we merged a really big PR in the push to get to RC1, Clemens added a whole bunch of samples related to the domain-specific specs, like the endpoint messages and schema specifications. But I wanted to add some that's around the core itself and not specific to a domain. So I added some of those. Increase the number of files that we run our tooling on, and in particular, the spell check. I want to make sure we catch more things and more of the MD files. When we do ordering of version IDs with all the ancestor stuff that we added recently, I added some language in there to make it clear that it is case insensitive comparing of version IDs. So if you remember, when we order ancestors, we look at the ancestor pointer first, and then if there are multiple things at the same level, we check for the created at timestamp. And if there are multiple of the same created at timestamp, then just to make sure we're not just doing a random ordering, we order alphabetically by the version ID itself. And I want to make sure that's case insensitive. So I added some language around that because we already do that case insensitively in other spots in the spec, but it wasn't 100% clear in the new ancestor stuff we added. So I made that, I add that. In the previous, or last week when we added the ancestor stuff, we made it clear that circular references with the ancestor pointers would be bad, right? You don't want a little loop going there saying who your parent is to go into circles. Well, we had a must in there that said, hey, implementations must detect this and flag it as an error, which in general is a good thing to do. However, we were talking about it, and while it's a good thing to do, if you have a lot of versions and your implementation isn't necessarily the best in the world, it may be very, very expensive to detect these things. And in your situation, it may not matter that much. You may decide, if the user decides to screw themselves up by putting a circular reference, then let them, for whatever reason. So we decided to remove the must and go with strongly recommended. That way it gives people an out to say, look, for whatever reason, I'm okay with circular references, whether it's because it's too expensive or my use case allows it. We just didn't want to force that really high bar on implementations if they don't want it. But that's why it's a strongly recommended, because it really, really, really should be there. Okay. As I talk more, ramble about the PR, if you think that's a bad decision, let me know. But we decided that was the safest way to go because we don't want to force too many implementation details on people if they really don't need it. It wasn't clear in the spec if you change the ancestor attribute, whether you actually should change this epoch and modify that. It kind of seems obvious when you think of the ancestor as just an attribute, and whenever you change any attribute, you modify these two things. However, people may look at the ancestor attribute kind of the same way as the default version ID pointer that we have. And modifying the default version ID pointer does not change the epoch or modify that timestamp on the version that you're pointing to or the one you were pointing to when you change it. It does change it on the meta section, but not the actual versions themselves. And to make sure people didn't think that, oh, pointers don't bump up epoch values, we want to make clear that no, if you change an ancestor pointer, the entity owning it, meaning the version, does have to be bumped up in terms of epoch and modified add. It's obvious for experts in the space, but maybe not for a newbie. So we just want to make that clear. We decided that if an attribute, according to the model, has a default value, then because it's always going to be serialized, it basically becomes a required attribute. And so rather than getting into a really weird situation where someone can define an attribute as not required, but give it a default value, because it kind of makes no sense to have that situation, we decided, no, if you're going to give a default value, it must also be tagged as required. Just that way it doesn't add confusion for a newbie reading this stuff. Okay. And then there was some model, I fixed up the models appropriately because we had some cases where it actually was marked as false and had a default value. And that's actually why this came up. I think Lila was looking at it and said, that makes no sense. So that's why we fixed it. added some text to the primer that says, look, if you're in a situation where, whether you're talking about attributes and instances or attributes in the model, if those attributes are required to be there, but they're not actually there on the input request, but the server can figure them out anyway, don't flag that as an error. The server should populate those with that other information from other places. And let me give you a concrete example of that, just in case it wasn't clear. Let me show you this. If, for example, we have this situation here, in the list of attributes, right, you give the attribute name here in the model, and then there's this required field called name. And this string and this string must always be the same. Well, an implementation receiving a model update may look at this and say, oh, well, if you don't give me a name, I'm going to flag it as an error because it's a required field. Well, we added some text to the parameter and said, look, you don't have to do that, right? If in situations where you can get the information from other places, like from here, go in and fill it in for the person. Be very liberal in what you accept, kind of an approach. And there are other spots like that. For example, if you're creating an entity, but you don't actually provide the entity ID in the body of the message, but they can get it from the actual URL, then go ahead and pick it up from there. Don't flag it as an error. Just to be more helpful from a usability perspective. That way, clients don't have to be quite as verbose as you might expect with required fields. It's just a useful kind of thing. All right, now, xregistry.io is our website, and it is hosted as a GitHub page. A long time ago, we decided that we really want to host some of our static files, like our schema docs for the domain-specific document or domain-specific specs and stuff like that, someplace on the web outside of our GitHub repo, preferably under xregistry.io, because that looks a little more official. And then we realized, you know what? Wouldn't it be cool if we actually hosted an xregistry at xregistry.io under there? Because all these files, like the schema docs and stuff like that, they should really be hosted in a schema registry, which is, hey, what we're designing here. So I recently figured out how to actually, in GitHub Pages, create a static file website. And so what I did was, as part of our build process of the website, I collect all the files that we want exposed through an X registry hosted at xregistry.io. I upload that into a mini registry. Then I tell the registry to dump itself out to files. And then I upload those files as part of this website. And it works. Because one of the things we talked about in the past was you shouldn't have to host a real HTTP server in order to host an X registry, right? You should be able to do it on S3 as an example. And that's basically what this becomes, right? And I proved that it works. So I'll show you guys in another call how you can actually point an X registry client to the xregistry.io, and you can ask for the root of the registry, you can ask for the groups, the resources, the versions, you get all the metadata. It looks just like a real API server, but it's all static files, and it's really kind of cool. So I'll show you that next time, but I was just excited they got all the tooling in place to make that work. Okay. Any questions about any of those? And in particular,
I'm just curious about the
yeah,
default value one being required. I'm sure you guys talked about it a lot,
yeah.
but I'm just curious, like, what does that mean in terms of like I'm not too familiar, like if there's SDKs or whatnot, but if, like something's a required field, does it like become a parameter, or is that not a thing for this?
Okay, so it's important to know up front that when an attribute is tagged as required, that does not mean it's required for a client to send it. All it means is that at the end of any transaction, that attribute has to have a value. Now,
Okay, that's all I care about. Okay,
yeah,
that makes
yeah.
sense. Yeah.
It depends on who fills it in is a detail for that either implementation or that scenario, right? So if you have a default value defined in the model, that's basically saying, well, if the client doesn't provide it, server, you fill it in for me. If you don't provide a default value, then it becomes client required. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, that makes total sense. All right,
Great.
thank you.
Yep, it's a good question. Um, yeah, so what was it? Oh, yeah, the circular reference was one. Anybody have any concern about decreasing it from a must check for circular references to just strongly recommended? Just want to make sure that one's okay with people. Okay, not hearing any objection. Any other questions or concerns about the PRs or about the PR in general? All right, any objection to approving? Cool. Thank you all. All right, Ben. Unfortunately, uh, Clemens appears to be on vacation this week. He tends to go on vacation, not warn us, so I didn't know. Um, but as soon as he gets back, I will um, nag him appropriately to review your PR.
Okay.
Are there any other changes that you want to call out? I've not had a chance to look at your latest round of changes.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I got that in later last night, but because there was actually a lot of comments, mostly like grammar stuff, but I ended up moving them appropriately. And so I want to. So I added a comment right before the SIG. So if you want to go back to the comments and go to the very end there, I kind of highlight
Come on.
why I think the Reddit or not, sorry, not Reddit, the audit trail for the arrays um, wasn't probably a I don't think it solves what we're intending it to solve, and I kind of highlight why. So I talked with the security team, and I didn't come up with all of this. It was like most of them, um, and this was their reasoning to kind of keep it out. With that said, however, this can always be an additive change if there becomes a need for it, but I don't think there ever will be. For the main reasons is the audit trail doesn't provide more security or more verifiability. It actually just kind of like just as I put, just kind of clutters the event because like you have to always assume that the last thing that signs it is well, if the signature is valid, that it's trustworthy. Um, so it doesn't really add anything anyways, because if they have the keys and the keys to sign something, then they could do anything, right? They can, rewrite that array, do whatever, and so have you. So the security aspect of that is within the keys. And if the keys get leaked, then that is a key issue or a key rotation or whatever, however you want to solve that. In addition to that, um, the auditing should probably be handled by an external system, whether that's through logging or some sort of auditing service, right? So I think that's probably a better way of handling this. Um, and in addition to that, there is a source on the events themselves. So I think it makes sense, because we have some level of provenance there, that it makes sense that we know where the origin is. However, if we want to add like a more origin related attribute in addition to this, I'm okay doing that, saying it came from this person or this signature or whoever. That way they don't need to go to the auditing service and backstep all the way back. I think that makes sense. But I think in terms of the array, I don't know if it really gives us as much benefit as we were originally thinking about it. So that's kind of like what I wanted to highlight here.
Okay. Yeah, and maybe I'm confused, but I didn't think the array was there for auditing purposes. I thought the array was there so that you can have nested verifications, and then you can pop the stack as you go from one node to the next. It wasn't for audit. It was simply to allow multiple verifications to be encoded within the same cloud event, but then be able to unwrap them in the right order because it's an array.
But why would you need to do that though? I guess it's
Because yeah, so the scenario I have in mind is you have four nodes at play. You have the sender and the receiver at the tail end, and then in between those you have some sort of proxies, right? Or one proxy sender and one proxy receiver, right? So you have four nodes in total. The original guy sends the message and it gets added with your verification stuff to it, and it goes through his proxy. That proxy then says, well, I don't know what the guy above me did. I don't care what he did. I'm going to verify this thing and add the appropriate stuff myself. So he then does the verification all over again using his own keys and possibly even add an attribute in the process, right? So there has to be a mechanism in place to have two levels of your verification attributes. Then the receiving proxy on the other side decodes it or verifies it, and in the process removes the outermost verification, which was added by the first proxy. Then he hands it off to the ultimate destination, who only sees one level of verification in there because the proxies in the middle added and removed their verification. Does that make any sense?
yeah, it makes sense, but why wouldn't the the sender, I guess the proxy just re-signed the whole thing again, I guess is
Yes,
my
yes,
question.
because he added an attribute.
Yeah, yeah. So why would he just not re-sign it and then that would be the new, why would you need an array, I guess is my question.
Because he can only re-sign it if he decodes or if he removes the initial verification, right?
Well,
Or if he
he's
re
not really,
or it, well if he or if he doesn't remove the initial verification and he re-signs it, aren't you going to get stomping attribute names? Because there's
no.
because the
I,
attribute names are in an array, right? It's a singleton, only one only one verification. I can't remember what your attributes are called, right? Your
yeah, yeah.
verification data is a singleton, which means every cloud event can only have one verification associated with it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that was intentional, right? I mean, like it's not really stomping it. He's just replacing, right? Because he's the new sender in this case, right? Even though he's a proxy, because he changed something, right? So that's kind of how I'm looking at it. Um,
Right, but then he has to take the old value, stash it away someplace in the message, right? And then so that the proxy on the other end, when he unverifies it, or if he verifies it and removes the verification attribute, he then has to go find that other attribute and put it back in your verification attribute so that the ultimate destination can do his own verification,
I,
right?
I don't think so, right? Like
Why not? Who did
because
who does the verification then of the original?
the proxy.
But that's not good because if he removes if he may not have the keys to do the verification.
Okay, so if they don't have the keys to do the verification and then they're adding something to it, then that is, yeah, that's a really wild.
I think because you can do the same thing, right? I don't think this is uncommon for like security in general, right? If you're going to encrypt your data, right? Not everybody can decrypt your data because not everybody in the middle has the keys, but between your various proxies that transport your message, they may add their own level of security around your stuff. Maybe it's transport level, maybe they tweak the data, who knows, right? But between whatever two guys in the middle are doing their secure communication, the data itself is just this opaque blob that may already have been signed or whatnot. And I'm looking at this the exact same thing, right? It may already have this cloud event verification logic already applied to it. And this man in the middle or this proxy in the middle may be adding its own because it needs to do it regardless of whether anybody above has already done it.
Yeah, so if he, well, that's the thing. If that's all he's doing is adding something, then does it need to be verified at that point as well? Like that should be fine, right? If he's just adding something, it's when I guess when he's actually completely changing something is when you need to re-verify.
Well, but
Is
if he's adding something and the receiving proxy wants to verify that added something was not changed, it needs to be signed, right?
Yeah, yeah, that would need to be signed if it's important, like if it's, if they want that to be trustworthy. But
Right.
like I said, you would need to then do a re-signing of it again, but and then do the verification. So you're saying, okay, let me think about this use case. So what you're saying is you have nodes in an ecosystem, well, not potentially not in the same ecosystem
Right.
where they might be in the same ecosystem, but they just don't have the keys to do the verification. Um, or they don't have a service to talk to do the verification, is another one. Um, so in this case, they would then need to wrap the previous vendor verification with their verification. So it's like so that's where the array comes in. Okay,
Hmm.
I misunderstood. I for some reason thought you meant auditing, but you
No,
don't.
I don't care about auditing. Nah.
Okay, so I argued that I pitched this completely wrong to security. Let me go back to them again and pitch it correctly, and then I'll get back to you sometime later today on this. Sorry, I just completely misunderstood what you were trying
No,
to get
that's
at.
fine. I probably wasn't clear, and that's fine. And take your time. It doesn't have to be today because Clemens is gone. Hope probably the rest of this week. Hopefully he'll be back on Monday, so you have time.
Okay, cool, cool. Thank you. Like I said, I'll probably have it today, if not tomorrow.
Okay, sounds cool. Um, does anybody else have any questions for Ben related to his PR? All right, cool. In that case, I'm hoping that means we're getting close to being done. Oh, I'm sorry, Eric, go ahead.
Just real quick, I want to reinforce that I strongly agree that one of the problems here was assuming that the keys can be accessed by an intermediary, and strongly agreed with that. That's not an assumption that I would always want to make. Uh,
Right,
Right.
right. Yeah, but I always figured if you're changing something, you probably want to be able to re-sign something as well. But yeah, that is a good point that the keys might not necessarily um be accessible. Because I was thinking like a closed, like you would have this in a closed ecosystem, but I realized, I can't think about it that way because, obviously, it could go across different companies, different systems. So I need to, yeah, that's definitely a bad assumption on my part. But yeah, I
Yeah.
will go ahead and repitch the right argument back to the security team.
Okay.
yeah, you
Yeah.
can consider a scenario where there's an IoT device that is signing an event, which is then being passed to a cloud infrastructure that is processing the event, sending it on, adding information, enriching it. That it nonetheless doesn't have access to that particular device's X 509 certificate, and wouldn't want to violate that X 509's kind of scope of security. So
Right, right. Yeah. I think, yeah, like I said, now it makes clear sense like what you guys were trying to get at. But like I said, I think I just completely misunderstood it. But yeah, I will definitely yeah, use that example and highlight what the issue is.
Yeah, and to be clear, at least in my mind, it's not so much the intermediary is trying to change the data as much as it's trying to add data. Because I think changing, it may need access to the key, I don't know, but it definitely adding new attributes that doesn't need access to the keys, and there are situations that he does want to sign what he adds.
Yeah, yeah, that is yeah, completely fair. And I think
Yeah.
like for some reason I was just like, oh, it's auditing, and then I just ran with that. Like I didn't even ask. I should have asked. So sorry. But
That's
yeah, yeah, I will give the right argument though.
okay, cool. All right. Anybody else want to chime in? Cool. All right. Okay. Too soon for today's discussion since I just opened this about an hour ago. However, I was going through the backlog of cloud event issues and I came across this one, which, oh my God. I know it says Sasha right here, but he goes by a different name. I can't remember what the other name is. Gosh, I can't remember. I'm so bad with names. Anyway, um, he was talking about how our auth ID extension has this language in here, and it specifically talks about putting an email address of the user um, as a unique identifier in the auth token. And he said that's probably not the right thing to do because it could be considered PII information. And that seemed reasonable to me. So what I did was, rather than trying to nag someone else to do it, I thought this might be something I could pump out really quickly. So I added this stuff here. This specification makes no statement as to what this value ought to be. However, including PII in a cloud event is often considered inappropriate. So some indirect reference, for example, a hash or a label of an API key might be considered. No normative statement here about what you should use, but just warning people about not to include PII. I thought that was probably a fair thing to say. Think about that. If you have any questions or suggested edits now or during the week, let me know. Um, I don't think this changes anything. It's just doesn't open the door for people to make bad choices like putting PII stuff in there. Okay. Then we'll review that again next week. Just want to point out what that one was. All right. Cool. Now, with that, I want to continue my quest to get our backlog down in the cloud event space. Someone a long time ago opened up this issue. I'll give you guys a second to read it. Now, for those of you who weren't around, not that long ago, someone created another Avro representation. I think mainly did it for performance reasons, but in the process, that new Avro protocol thing that they defined, I think removed this map thing that he was worried about here and actually had strongly typed attributes for all of our cloud event stuff. So I think the compact or fast Avro, I can't remember what it was called, I think actually addresses this concern. So I want to close this issue. So my question is for some of you old timers, David, Eric, Klaus, or Tommy, do you guys agree that that should probably address this guy's concerns?
The short answer for me is that I don't know. I'm still reading.
Okay, I'll let you.
Sorry.
Sorry, I didn't give you enough time. I'll go quiet. Actually, I just
I'm
realized.
not sure I can
Yeah,
give a good answer, but I think it would be worth asking the person whether that does a better job for their scenario. And certainly
yeah,
indicating, I believe at the time we said, you know what, this new one is probably the one that people should use. And the old one we have to leave for posterity or something like that. But
yeah. I did ask him. He hasn't responded. That's otherwise I would have closed the issue. And I just realized that he asked some questions here at the end that I did not answer. But relative to the map stuff, I was just kind of assuming it did cover it. So Eric, do you think it covers it?
I don't feel qualified to answer that.
Darn it. Okay. Anybody else want to chime in? Otherwise, I may just wait for Clemens because I think he has a lot of experience with Avro.
So I haven't checked out this Avro compact format it is called, so I don't know what it is exactly about.
Okay, fair enough. Okay. In case I was hoping somebody on the call would know, but that's fine. I'll wait till Clemens or someone else is back who can look at it. And I'll try to answer some of the questions he asked down here. I forgot about those. Okay, so moving on. Question for you guys. So okay, I'm going to poke on old timers here who remember XML. So this guy's basically saying, hey, why don't you put your cloud event extensions under an extensions attribute type of thing? Because there's no way to do that with XML schema. To put them at the same level as the normal attributes. But then I pointed the guy to this document here, which says, hey, you can do that. You can have, the schema of an event or of a structure, and you could add an XS any to add any attributes you want. And he came back and said that you can't, it will fail schema validation if you do that. And I don't remember XML well enough to understand why that's true. At the time when he said that, it made sense to me. But going back and looking at it this morning, I'm not so sure that's true anymore. Because I don't understand why we don't define why we don't define our XML schema to look something like this. Event, all of our strongly typed ones, or all the spec defined ones, followed by an XSNE. The exact same way that W3 school site does it. And that's where all the extensions would go. Does anybody on here remember XML well enough to know why this isn't a solution for the problem? I'm going to pick on you, Klaus, because I know you had. Thank you, David. Klaus, do you remember anything with XML enough?
Not that much. I mean, I was already around when it was in use, and I mean, I know places where it still is, but I never really uh, went into the subtleties of XML.
Okay. Okay, fine. I'll wait till we get maybe Clemens back on the call. I know he definitely
But
remembers this stuff.
But in the meantime, I had a look at this Avro compact format, and I think it should address that concern that was raised in the other issue.
Excellent.
Because
Cool. Okay.
yeah.
Excellent. Thank you for double checking me. Okay. So I'll focus on the answering his questions then that I missed. Okay. And we'll hold off on this one then. But like I said, I think we could either close this or simply modify the our XML spec to make sure that people can add an XSNE if they want to allow extensions. I think that's how we can close that issue. All right. So again, this Sasha guy, I can't. Oh, Alex, that's his name. He goes by Alex. He was managing our translation to Hebrew for all of our documentation, and he wanted to have he opened up an issue to remind himself to do the log level one, but he's kind of vanished. You can tell, it's been like almost 5 years now, or sorry, 3 years, since he's been working on this stuff. I assume he's moved on to other things. I'm inclined to close this issue to get rid of our backlog. We have a lot of other pieces of documentation that are missing, not just for Hebrew, but other languages in general. So this isn't just a Hebrew issue with this one file. There's a whole bunch of other things. And I think it's just a general problem. So I'm inclined to close this issue and say at some point, we'll go back and possibly look at the translation stuff once we get people who are willing to do it. But there's no point in having one issue open for this one file. So my proposal is to close this issue right now, just to get it out of our backlog. Does anybody have any alternate opinion? Any objection to closing? Okay. I will do so. Thank you. Okay, hold on a minute. What was this one about? Oh, never mind. I was going to ask John if he's on the call, but he's not. Okay. Just a quick question. Ben, this partition key extension one, you said you might try to find some time to just add a quick example to that one.
Yeah. So I haven't had a chance to look at it, but I did add some time to do that this week. So I can definitely take that and do that this week.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. And I went through a whole bunch of other ones that I think are on the list for not necessarily closing, but nagging people. So I will nag Clemens a lot, and I'm going to try to hunt down Jem for the ones related to his stuff. I think they're mainly related to, or at least some of them are related to the XML stuff. So, okay, that's it for the issues. On the positive side, just so you guys know, we are down to 25 issues, which all fit on one screen. So that's exciting. I like a small list. So like I said, my goal is to try to get this list down to 0. Now that won't be necessarily all the issues, just so you know. All the ones that are related to the CESQL or subscription spec or labeled as 2.0 are excluded from the list. I'll eventually tackle these other ones later, but I wanted to start with just the pure cloud event ones. Okay. So thank you for indulging me in trying to get that down. All right, that's the end of the agenda that I had. Does anybody have any other topics they'd like to bring up? All right, 246, and I forgot Klaus. All right, cool. In that case, thank you all for joining, and we'll talk again next week. Okay, bye everybody.
Everyone.
Bye.